In the last lecture, we finished the setup of our project. Now I want to start developing the app. For that, I'll first of all run npm start to start this development server so that we can see the app run on localhost 3000. Make sure you're saving all files so that you don't get the compilation errors I got. And with that, you will basically not see anything because we emptied the app.js file. It's just having an empty div. Obviously, we don't see content. Now let's start implementing the components we sketched out in the previous lectures. And there are actually a couple of components we need, but we can kind of separate our project into two branches. Well, overall, these branches, we got a layout component, but below that, we basically have navigation-related components like the toolbar and the side drawer, and we have the meat of our application, the burger builder. Now, I'd say let's start with the burger builder then. That's probably the more fun part to start with. Now, for that, I first of all will create that layout component though, which will kind of be a wrapper implementing the toolbar and the burger builder then. And later in this course, once we add routing and more pages to our application, we will take advantage of this layout where the toolbar will always be there, but where we will then switch the page which is rendered in the content area of the layout, so to say. Now, we could simply turn the app.js file into a layout because it basically is the root component of our application, and that would be a perfectly fine approach. I will still create a separate component for that though, to have a component entirely focusing on the layout. Now for that, I'll create a new subfolder in the source folder, and I will name it components. I will create a second subfolder, which I'll name containers. Now keep in mind, containers are basically stateful components, so typically components created with the class keyword, whereas components going into the components folder are stateless components, typically functional components. Now, I will create the layout in the components folder because right now I don't need to manage any state there. So in components, I'll create a subfolder which I'll name layout with a capital L. And in layout, I will create the layout.js file so that we have this layout component placed in that folder. That is a typical project setup you use in React, having a components and a containers folder. Other folders you often see are an assets folder. We will use this later once we add a logo. And you might also have a folder for the Redux store and so on. We haven't even learned about that. We will add it once we got that. So back to the layout then. There I will create a normal functional component and store it in a constant named layout. And there, this is my function. And now let's have a look at how this function should look like, or how the JSX exported by that function should look like. There, I basically want to have two areas, you could say. I'll have a div, for now, just a placeholder, which will hold my toolbar, my side drawer, and probably for the side drawer, also a backdrop. So we will need to replace this div with 3 components later on. We also did plan this in the previous lectures. Below this part, we'll have a main area, and this is the normal main element provided by HTML. And there, I want to output the component we wrap with this layout. So I will use props children. And for that, of course, I need to import props, or not imported, excuse me, get it as an argument. Now this allows us to simply use this layout component as a wrapper around the core content component we want to render to the screen. Now here we get an error in the IDE because one important thing is missing: the import of the React package, or the React object I should say, from the React package. Once we added this, we still see an error because we have adjacent JSX elements. Now, I taught you that there are basically 2 solutions to that. Do you remember them? Well, for one, we could return an array here instead of JSX, which is sitting next to each other. If we return an array and give each item a key, we are allowed to kind of return adjacent elements. The alternative is to create such an auxiliary higher order component, which I showed you in the last course module. It serves only one purpose, wrapping something and immediately outputting it, but hence fulfilling the requirement of having a wrapping component. I will use this. We also have, of course, the third option of wrapping everything in a div here, or another element, but I don't need that div or any other element. Actually, I want to have adjacent elements. That is why I will go with the higher order component approach and create such a utility auxiliary component. For that, I'll create a new folder in the source folder, HOC for higher order component, and there I will create a aux.js file. Now, the auxiliary component is really simple. It's a functional component, a stateless component therefore, and I will name it aux, and here I just get props as an input, and I return props children, nothing else. No wrapping element. We don't even have any JSX in this file, which is also why we don't have to import React from React. I will then export aux as the default in this file and save the file. And now back in the layout file, I can import aux with a capital A, like for all custom components you want to use, and now we have to move up until we are at the source folder level, and there from the HOC folder, from the aux file, without .js at the end, because keep in mind, our build workflow will add this file extension for JavaScript files automatically. And now I can wrap everything here with this auxiliary component so that we now fulfill the requirement of having a wrapping root element. Finally, let me export this layout function as the default for this file. And now with that, we can use it in the app.js file in our root component. Now, granted, you could also go to the index file, import layout here, and simply render the layout function as the root component. That's basically the same solution as making the app.js file the root component. You could absolutely do that, and that wouldn't be wrong. It's just my personal decision to have this root component in case I should ever decide to restructure the app, add some state to my root component, maybe conditionally render different layouts, or do anything like that. For the app as it is, we could definitely turn the app component itself into the layout. Now, enough talk about that. Let's import our layout component then with a capital L and now we have to go into the components folder, into the layout folder, and there to the layout.js file. And now we can simply render layout, and this should now not be a self-closing component, because the idea behind the whole layout is that I can wrap another component with it. For now, let's simply wrap a paragraph just to see if this is working, if we are correctly passing this to layout, but later we will of course wrap a real component, the page we actually want to display, with it. So make sure all files are saved and then head over to your localhost 3000 page, make sure your development server is running, and there you should see our placeholder for the toolbar, for the side drawer, the backdrop, and so on, and you also see the test paragraph I just added. If you inspect everything, you will notice that we don't use our Open Sans font though, because we haven't added it. So let's fix this too. Let's go to index CSS. We did add the import to the public folder. So here we simply have to add Open Sans like this as our main font and use sans serif as a backup font. And now you see the font changed, and in the Elements tab, you also see that now it is applied. With that, we got the roof of our application finished for now. There's of course a lot of work left regarding the navigation here, the toolbar and everything. But since we don't have multiple pages right now, we don't need to take care about the navigation right now. So let's instead focus on the core functionality of our application, the burger builder. We'll start implementing that in the next lectures.